Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to fix your motorized bicycle if it's not starting up for you. This video goes for all of the 66/80cc China motors. So wherever the case may be, there's only a few spots that you could be having issues. If the bike's been sitting for a long time, the first thing that I would check is the carburetor. The main jet can get clogged just from sitting around, and the gas will start to get really stale, and that jet will get really dirty, and you'll have to clean it out. And I'll be showing you that along the way. So this is kind of just an overview here. So I would check your carburetor, make sure that is nice and clean. Go ahead and clean it out. And if that's not working, I would definitely recommend changing out your spark plug, because I've had it before where these spark plugs will foul out and you'll diagnose everything else for air leaks and cleaning the carb and checking your ignition system, and then you pull this puppy off and it's completely dark, and it just, when your plug is fouled out, the electrode can't consistently travel that spark and it just won't simply run. Another really overlooked failure point, mine's all taped up in here, but the CDI wires is really important. Nowadays, the factories are actually soldering in these things wrong, and this may be a new build, right? And you put red to red, black to black, or whatever the case may be, and it still won't start. Well, if it's not starting from a brand new motor, I would swap those wires because sometimes they can be backwards. As you can see, I went ahead and pulled off the magneto cover. So there's a few things that you want to look under here for. The first thing is you want to make sure that your magneto gap is actually on point. So this motor has a lot of compression, so just bear with me. I got to try and turn this thing. But basically what you're looking for is you're looking for an even gap in between those two contact points on the magneto. And you can use a feeler gauge, gap it to 20 thousandths, or you can just use a piece of paper and fold it over 3 times. Both of those will work. So if your bike ran in the first place, this may not be a problem, but sometimes these screws can back out and cause the gap to widen or narrow down. It really depends on your situation. But another thing that is also overlooked on these bicycle kits is if, once again, it's a brand new motor, these can be installed backwards, and you'll take this plug out and you'll do your spark test and you go, oh, but my bike has spark. This thing could still be backwards, so what I would do is I would remove it, take this 14mm nut, remove it, flip it around, put it back on, and try it then. And that pretty much sums up your magneto setup and your wires. In behind my panel here, you may be able to see it. It's really hard to get to. But in there's your CDI. There's not really much you can do to adjust that. You basically, if you've done all this stuff and it still isn't starting, it must be the CDI. Another little tip here is when you're trying to narrow things down, try to do one thing at a time. I'm kind of just doing an overview to give you guys a general idea on what to do in this situation. But if you're still having issues, I would start with the carb. Make sure that's squared away. I would move to the electrical system. Don't do everything at once, because if you do that, what you'll wind up doing is causing more problems than you started with, and you won't know what made the difference for it to run. So the next thing that we're going to dive into is our fuel system. So if you look in my bikes, because I run them quite often, go for rides, the fuel system is really clean. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that, but it's nice, clean, fresh blue gas, and you want to see that. What you don't want to see, and I'll throw up a picture, is a bunch of stale old gas that looks like it has dirt particles in it, and you want to go ahead and clean that out. So if that's the case, go ahead and drain that out just by removing your fuel line and dumping all the old gas out. And another thing you want to inspect is your fuel filter. You want it to look like mine, where it's nice, once again, fresh blue gas. What you don't want to see, and I've seen it before, is on the bottom corner there, you'll see a bunch of dirt particles. And you can't really clean this specific one. You probably could, but the China filters, you really can't clean that well, and you're better off either not running one, because there is one technically in the tank, or you can replace it with a new one. So once you've done all that, then you can go ahead and buy some of the seafoam stuff. It's about 10 bucks a can. It's well worth your time, because even once you do this one, you don't have to put the whole thing in, obviously. I would say roughly, I usually put about a quarter of it in, so put that in the tank if it's a serious case, and you'll just run the bike. And not only will it clean the sediment, but it'll also clean the carbon buildup that's on the top of your piston, so it's kind of a win-win. Okay, so once we've done all that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the cylinder head. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Why would this not make my bike start? But it's actually pretty common sense, really, because if you recently took your head off, let's say you put high compression head on and it's not starting, or the bike's been sitting a really long time, sometimes your head gasket, which you can see under there, if you look in between the cylinder and the head, may have blown, and it might have blown that ride, and then you put it away and it won't start. Again, very rare case, but it's worth mentioning. Go ahead and pop off your head. Make sure your head gasket is really good. Use some rubbing alcohol and clean the head and clean the cylinder. Put everything back together. Torque it properly. I have a little torque wrench here, as you can see up on my wall. It's a little certified tool. It's nothing fancy, guys. I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a torque wrench. Just get one like this, and you can see that it does have the 12 foot-pounds on there. So go ahead and use that and torque your head bolts down in an X pattern to 12 foot-pounds. Make sure that's good. Basically, what I'm trying to get across here is retorque your head. So the final thing that we're going to be talking about is air leaks. And this engine's no stranger to air leaks. I've had plenty of them on this bike, and I've managed to solve them, but they're definitely tricky to find. The most common air leak, and this isn't really a good example because it's a reed valve, but on my other bikes here, like if I look at the Yamaha here, it has a standard piston port design where it just has the stock intake. And right there, what I went ahead and done is added a O-ring that goes inside the carb. And basically what that does is when the two pieces sandwich together, there's a proper seal there. It's not just metal on metal. And guys, you can pick up O-ring kits for like $1.88. They're super duper cheap. And I got, I think, 50 pieces in this one. And the ones that you actually need, you got about 10. So if you have a bunch of builds, what I recommend doing is, even if they're running fine, just go ahead and install these. It's kind of a preventive maintenance type thing. And once you install these, you can ensure that there won't be any more intake leaks. Also, make sure that your intake gasket is not ripped. And basically, the way to test for air leaks is, if you tried to fix some of these things, go back with a bit of carb spray, brake cleaner, WD-40. Any of those will work, and spray the intake here, spray down where it meets the cylinder. You can even spray your head for head gasket leaks, because those are another, failure point. I wouldn't worry about that. I will worry about your base gasket more, because it is a gasket material and it can get in. So definitely make sure your base gasket's good. And you can tell if you have an air leak because your bike will be idling high. It'll suddenly have more power, which you think is a good thing, but it's actually bad because it's sucking more air, which could blow up your engine if you leave it like that long enough. If it is a newer build, go ahead and tighten down all of your case hardware. It will definitely make sure the cases are sealed together. And we're going to take this magneto cover off once again on a different bike to find out the main cause of air leaks, if it's not those, and that is your crank seals. And it's unfortunate how many builds nowadays have crank seal problems. It never used to be like this. I mean, they used to have somewhat quality control, but I just find a lot of these newer engines are having crank seal problems, and people are overlooking it. And what they'll end up doing is they'll buy a whole nother engine and just throw it on, because they've tried all the other stuff. And this is one of the things that people just overlook. And it's really sad, because it's so cheap to do and replace. Or sometimes you can get lucky, like I've had in the past, where all you have to do is just push it back in, because it simply is, just fell out because it wasn't, pressed in properly. But yeah, so we'll get these 4 screws out, and I'll show you guys what I mean. It's not only on the magneto side, it's on the clutch side as well. But that side doesn't have problems, because for some reason they thought it was a good idea to make that side thicker and this side thinner. On a YD100, they're both the same spacing. Don't know why they did that, but it is what it is. So we're going to remove this here, get it all off, and show you guys what I'm talking about. And this is the side that you'll probably have the most issues with, just because it's a thinner seal and there's a lot of compression that goes through the case. So these things are very known to blow out. I believe they make Viton seals that are really good for like race motors and stuff. I don't really have high performance race motors at the moment, so I've not bought those yet. But anywho, I don't know if you're going to be able to see in there, guys. Probably not, but if you go ahead and remove this, you'll see a little seal in there. And what you can go ahead and do is hit it with a 19mm socket. And what that's going to do is it's going to push it back into the case of the motor and seal that puppy right up. So guys, I have my flashlight on here, and I removed the magnet, and I have my 19mm socket. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to seat it onto there, get your hammer and give it a few taps, and it should seal it right back into place. But it's just a cheap little rubber seal that tends to fail on these things. And like I said, those Viton seals are really expensive, but If you're running a motor with high case pressure, it's probably worth the investment to do so. So this is kind of a last resort type thing, but if you've done all the things above and the bike is still not running for you, there could be a few main issues. And when I say main issues, I mean catastrophic. This is referring to the top end of your engine. If you go ahead and pull your cylinder head off, and what you want to see is something like this, a nice coffee brown on the cylinder dome. What you don't want to see is a bunch of pitting. Like, when I mean pitting, I mean metal hitting the top of this thing. That means that your crank bearings are going out, or your wrist pin bearings going out, and the metal's getting in your engine, and it's just not very good. Moving on to your cylinder, things you want to look out for. You want a nice uniform surface on your cylinder. What you don't want to see is, any sort of score marks, because that means you're losing compression. You don't want to see any light spots on the cylinder, because that means your chrome lining is coming off. And at that point, you'll definitely have to replace the cylinder. And you want to make sure there's no major cracks in the ports, no port edges chipping away or anything like that. So, and also you want to make sure your mating surfaces are flat on the cylinder. What I usually do is I get a file, and I file both of these surfaces when I'm porting the motor. Don't make fun of me, this is my first port job. But yeah, you just want to make sure that your cylinder is in good condition. And if you guys are still watching this video and having problems, well, unfortunately, you're probably the one that ran into the big issue, and that is some kind of crack in the case. The only way they're going to be able to fix this is if you split the cases, find that crack, and fill it with JB Weld. I will have to do a video on that with diagnosing that, because that is a whole nother animal. You got to take the engine all apart, and you got to find this crack in the case, and you got to track it down, pressure test it, make sure it's good. It's a horrible process to go through, and at that point, I would just buy a motor, because it's a pain in the butt, especially if you're trying to build a performance motor, because you got to fix that and then trust it to build your top end. So, yeah, man, if you have a crack in the case, I would not invest any time or money in that engine. I would use it for parts and just buy a whole new one. So that pretty much covers all of the issues that you could have when your bike's not starting. I know it sounds horrendous, but if you do one of the many things that I've showed you today, let me know in the comments what worked for you. And I just wanted to get this video out there. That way, if somebody's scrolling through this and they need help with their bike, hopefully this video can help them in some sort of way. And if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. And I'll see you guys in the next video.